There is a Bible with 81 books, the biggest in all of Christianity, and it contains ancient scriptures that nearly every other church left behind, including one that is quoted inside the New Testament everyone already reads. This 81 book collection belongs to the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, a tradition whose scriptures form the largest and most varied biblical canon in the Christian world. Within its pages, the library is divided into 46 books of the Old Testament and 35 books of the New Testament. To put these numbers in perspective, most modern Protestant Bibles contain 66 books, while the Roman Catholic Bible contains 73. Eastern Orthodox traditions also count more, typically ranging between 78 and 81 books, depending on how those communities group their texts. From the perspective of the Ethiopian Church, however, this is not a story of adding books to an existing Bible. Instead, it is a story of preservation. While other branches of Christianity gradually narrowed their canonical boundaries over the centuries, the Christian community in the Horn of Africa simply retained a wider selection of texts that had been translated and cherished since the early centuries of the faith. This history is not a tale of secret conspiracies or hidden knowledge, but a direct reflection of how geography, language, and independent development shaped the scriptures. To understand how this parallel trajectory occurred, we must examine how early Christians defined, copied, and lived with their sacred writings. At the heart of this ancient library are works that disappeared from the rest of the Christian world centuries ago. Among the most prominent of these preserved writings are the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, texts that survived complete only in the classical Ethiopian language of Ge'ez. In the Old Testament portion, the collection also contains 3 distinct volumes known as Maccabean. While the name sounds identical to the books of Maccabees found in Roman Catholic Bibles, these are entirely separate writings. Rather than recording the Jewish revolt against the Syrian Greeks, they focus on different figures and moral lessons. The scriptural world of this tradition extends to additional New Testament era texts as well. This includes the books of the Covenant, which record teachings of Christ to his disciples. The biblical corpus also integrates several early church order manuals. Among these are the Synodos, a collection of apostolic rules, the Ethiopic Clement, which addresses early theology and practice, and the Didascalia, a text containing guidelines on church administration and worship. For centuries, these documents survived because monastic scribes in remote highland scriptoria continuously hand-copied them onto goatskin parchment, binding them into heavy leather volumes. By keeping these texts within their active scriptural collection, the Ethiopian Church preserved a material record of early Christian literature that other traditions eventually set aside. The foundation of this expansive collection was laid in the early 4th century, long before the scriptural disputes of Western Europe. Between the years 324 and 330, the kingdom of Aksum, located in the highlands of modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, officially adopted Christianity. This conversion, led by King Ezana and guided by a Syrian missionary bishop named Frumentius, made Aksum one of the oldest continuously Christian states on earth, adopting the faith even before the Roman Empire officially did. Because of this early adoption, the fledgling church received its scripture through translation traditions rooted in the Greek Septuagint, the primary Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. Translators immediately began rendering these texts into classical Ge'ez, the local Semitic language. This momentous translation effort took place at a time when the boundaries of the Christian Bible were still fluid, open, and highly inclusive throughout the Mediterranean. The early believers in Aksum embraced a wide library of sacred writings that were widely read and cherished across the ancient world, rather than a later rebellion or an attempt to expand an established book. The Ethiopian canon represents the natural preservation of this early inheritance. By the time later theological councils elsewhere began to strictly define and limit their scriptural lists, the Christian community in the Horn of Africa had already integrated this broad collection of texts into their active spiritual life. In the Mediterranean world, the early fluid approach to Scripture gradually gave way to formal boundary setting. An early landmark occurred in the mid-4th century, around the year 363, at the Council of Laodicea. This regional gathering of bishops produced a list of approved books that excluded various pseudepigraphal works, including the Book of Enoch, while affirming texts aligned with the Hebrew canon. Centuries later, theological debates in Western Europe accelerated this narrowing process. During the 16th century, the Protestant Reformation introduced strict criteria to evaluate which books belonged in the Bible. Reformers like Martin Luther prioritized texts preserved in the Hebrew Scriptures, required a direct connection to a recognized prophet or apostle, and looked for broad, continuous acceptance by the early church. Under these guidelines, works that fell outside these standards, often due to historical judgments that they were written much later than their traditional authors' lifetimes, were removed from the canonical list. In response to these Protestant reforms, the Roman Catholic Church formally defined its own biblical boundaries at the Council of Trent in 1546. This council officially confirmed a 73-book canon, reaffirming the historical deuterocanonical books, but omitting pseudepigraphal works like Jubilees and Enoch. Scholars of church history emphasize that this parting of ways was a slow, gradual process of narrowing that unfolded over more than a millennium. While the geographically isolated Ethiopian church retained its expansive collection of translated scriptures, Western traditions developed highly formalized standards of verification based on continuous manuscript survival, ultimately drawing the boundaries of their modern Bibles in different places. The Book of Enoch presents a striking case of these differing canonical boundaries, because it is quoted directly beside the New Testament itself. In the Epistle of Jude, verses 14 and 15, the author writes that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about coming judgment. This quotation corresponds directly to the first chapter of Enoch, verse 9. During the early centuries of the faith, this apostolic citation led church fathers like Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria to treat Enoch as Holy Scripture. Yet, by the 5th century, most Western and Byzantine authorities set the book aside, doubting its ancient authorship. In the highlands of East Africa, however, The Ethiopian and Eritrean churches maintained the text within their Old Testament. This division represents a difference in historical and theological judgment, as separate traditions analyzed the same biblical evidence and reached different conclusions. This preservation succeeded largely because of geography, language, and independent legal traditions. Ethiopian Christians worshipped in Ge'ez, a classical Semitic language. This linguistic environment insulated their scriptures from the shifting translation trends of Europe and the Near East. At the same time, the rugged East African highlands and immense physical distance from Rome and Constantinople shielded the local church from the centralizing pressures of the Mediterranean world, while other regional churches felt the push to standardize their lists. No foreign council held the authority to prune the Ethiopian collection. Instead, the church guided its own practice. The Fetha Nagast, a 13th century law code, served as a legal and religious foundation, reinforcing the authority of these books. Scholars today point to this history to explain why the Ethiopian canon is often described as having both a narrower and a broader count. It remains a collection that historians characterize as neither fully open nor fully closed. Ultimately, the Ethiopian canon is not a collection of added books, but a preserved library. While other traditions narrowed their borders, Ethiopia kept the doors open. This ancient heritage invites us to ask, what do we lose when we draw our boundaries too tightly? Join the conversation below.